Thank you for the invitation. I think it's great to be here. It's an excellent conference. I really enjoy it very much, all the talks I have seen and heard today. And with this slide, I want to come back to what Brian mentioned about people who still do not believe in global warming. So if all the scientists and all the research cannot convince, maybe this starts to become a little more convincing. As a matter of fact, I think there's a real need for reacting in urban design in particular, what we also learned from Brian. And I think this is what I want to talk a little bit about. I think I can jump over this since you have mentioned our offices already. We are still a very small engineering firm with something like 50-ish engineers on those 4 locations, developing energy and climate strategies for indoor and outdoor environments. I think that's the basics of our work. And we call it, and this is TU Munich, which is a little more than a hobby. It's my second life now, and keeps me also busy, but it's kind of interesting to link our engineering practice with academics and the academic world and research in particular. Okay, so this is how we call what we do. We call it climate engineering. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what it means, we were invited in 2010 to give an installation at the Architecture Biennale in Venice. And we thought, what do we do? And we ended up with this idea to do an indoor cloud, because the cloud for us is the visualization of climate engineering. And in order to get a cloud, you need to have a layer which is saturated, which has 100% humidity. And then when you get 100% humidity, you can spray in water, and the water does not evaporate, and it starts to appear as a cloud. So that was the idea, and in order to make it float, we had a layer of cold air below. Cold air goes down, warm air goes up, and a layer of hot air above. So that was the basic idea. It took us a couple of months until we reached this stable conditions, but this was the cloud from below, and then Tetsuo Kondo, an architect from Japan, he designed the space, the ramp for people to walk through the different layers and experience what it means to be in 35 degrees, 100% humidity. And this is the cloud from above. I think the reason this has to do with indoor conditions. I think what's interesting for us is to what extent we can manipulate conditions to make it comfortable for people, or to localize comfort where people are and not to condition a whole space. But if we relate it to urban design and urbanism and climate change, it's also interesting. You can't imagine how much energy it takes to create this. So it was not really a sustainable project. It was an interesting project. So you see how powerful nature is and does it all by itself. So coming back to urbanism and climate in the urban environment. This is a picture someone from Foster did in Dubai, showing a main street in Dubai. And what you see is that being exposed to an air temperature of 40 degrees, people see a radiant temperature which is in average at 52 degrees, plus people are exposed to the sun. So the temperature people feel is somewhere in the range of 50, 60 degrees. And this is all man-made. So whatever we do in this environment, we make it worse. And this is, so I fully agree with what we have heard before, that architecture can make a change to the good or to the bad. In this case, it was unfortunately to the bad, and the question is, what do we need to do? And I think we need to better understand how we influence climate. So in addition, what happens, so in addition to the urban climate and the urban heat island effect, we see global warming and a higher frequency of heat waves. We had another heat wave this year, and we recognized in 2003 that our cities are not resilient for those heat waves. And the statistics show that up to 40,000 people died in this heat wave, and Paris and France got affected the most. And so in a competition which was called Météo de France, where we worked with Atelier 10 architects in Paris, we also had Météo de France in our team. And that was quite interesting because they showed us this diagram. And this diagram, you see the upper diagram, displays the average summer temperature in downtown Paris over the past 100 years. And then all of a sudden, you see the summer of 2003, which is much higher up here. So, and then you see what's going to happen, what's predicted in terms of global warming. So the summer of 2003 is going to become the very normal summer, the usual summer in 2050, and the coldest summer they're going to have in 2100. So Paris is going to get the climate of Sevilla with a completely different city fabric of Sevilla. Sevilla had been developed around this climate. Paris had been developed around another climate. So the question was, if we think about the greater Paris area, this was the competition about, we also have to think about what can we do? We have to think about climate mitigation. And so together with Métiers de France, we developed those simulations, and I'm not going to go through the details, but I think the basic message was that if we change the reflectivity of surfaces, if we increase vegetation in the city, but seriously increase, etc., if we have green roofs, we can basically mitigate what's going to come by global warming. I think that's the message. So it's a design issue. And it's in our hands, or basically it's in your hands, because we're going to retire pretty soon. So this is what you're probably going to do over your career to fix what our generation has messed up, and the generation before us. But I think that's the good thing. It's a design issue, but we need to have a master plan. Every city should have a master plan how to deal with these things. And there is another thing we have learned when we work with Métiers de France in Paris. During these hot summer days, under peak conditions, downtown Paris had only 1 degree more than the suburbs. So when they had 38 degrees in the suburbs, downtown Paris had only 39. So the urban heat island effect during peak day conditions was only 1 degree. Whereas at nighttime, it was 10 degrees. So whereas the suburbs cooled down to 20 degrees, downtown Paris stored so much heat in the streets, in the parking infrastructure, basically a lot in the car infrastructure and the material of buildings, so that the coldest temperature in these heat waves was 30 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning. So if it gets 30 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning, the buildings cannot cool down. They do not have air conditioning. So our design, or let's say climate design in housing in Europe, is that you cool down your thermal mass at nighttime. Now, if the urban area doesn't cool down, your buildings cannot cool down, the buildings get too hot. So that's the result. So much more than peak day conditions is the nighttime temperature on which we need to work. So again, this is a design issue. I found this on the internet. It's a plaza in Mexico City. And it's not designed for people's comfort, as you can see. So the question is, how can we do better? And this is an image from Ecosistema from Madrid, where they installed this in Madrid on a plaza. And it creates a cold spot. Instead of a hot spot, it creates a cold spot in the city, and people gather, and it became a real gathering place. And what inspired us when we worked on a project in Damascus was actually this one. It's an image from Damascus, and it's a souk. It's basically a shopping mall in Damascus. And in this hot climate, people live outside. And this was really inspiring, and we started to think about how can you create these comfortable environments in this hot climate. And then someone from Transolar found this one in Kuala Lumpur. And Kuala Lumpur is a tropical climate. It's super hot, super humid, and unbearable, basically. But you see those fans, and those fans spray in a little bit of water, and you think, does it really make sense in this humid climate to add more humidity? But you see all those people, you can barely see it, but I tell you, all those people are sitting in the shade under this canopy, and these fans create a little bit of movement, and the evaporation creates a little bit of cooling, and it makes them happy, even though it's really super humid and still super hot. And inside, it was overcooled to 18, 20 degrees. There was nobody inside. So everybody was sitting outside in this environment. And we start to recognize that, not only we, a lot of people start to recognize that in an outdoor environment, people accept a much wider range of temperature and humidity. And it's about us to understand this, and a lot of universities did research in order to classify and calculate what do people accept and what do people not accept. And it's basically about the air temperature, obviously, but then also about this mean radiant temperature, so all your surfaces surrounding you, how much heat they radiate onto your body. Then solar radiation, air velocity, air humidity, your clothing and your activity. And this goes all into an equation which allows you to calculate the perceived temperature, or UTCI. There are different standards, but this is the temperature people perceive, and then you can classify it and put it into different range, and you try to avoid great heat stress or something like this. And all of a sudden, with those equations, you're able to calculate those environments. And we followed up on Damascus, for instance, and figured out that it's a perfectly comfortable environment. Being in the shade, having some radiant cooling from the trees, some evaporative cooling also from the trees, and having some air movement. The same thing we calculated with Kuala Lumpur, came to the same conclusion. So I think these are the tools we have, and we need to use them to design different places. And one I want to show you is also in Paris, where we work with TVK architects from Paris. It's a redesign of the Place de la République. And these are basically the tool was like a toolbox applied and programmed the plaza to create a better environment, to make it more beautiful, obviously, but also to make it more comfortable for people, and ideally have like a cold spot that also acts into the neighborhood. And so this was the Place de la République before, and this was after the redesign. And I think what works, this again, this couple of images of before, and then a couple of images of after the redesign of the Place de la République. And I think what we are really proud of is actually this image. And this is in a hot summer, and you see the kids playing in the water, and the evaporative cooling creates a nice environment. And people in Paris are they really enjoy and love this Place de la République since it's redesigned. And of course, it was a redesign in design and in landscape, but it was also a redesign of the climate. And it's the climate that contributes to a better environment. So we use this because also Paris is so affected for an installation which we have up in Paris right now. As we talk, we worked with Carlo Ratti from Turin, and he's also professor at the MIT. And the installation is called Cool Paris. Basically, was the sign says, pick your climate. So the idea is we found a material which was developed by Stanford University, by scientists from Stanford University, which has the inverse properties of glass. It blocks shortwave radiation, but it transmits long-wave radiation. So even during the day, you emit long-wave radiation to the space. So it creates a cool environment, even on a sunny day. And we said, like Buckminster Fuller created this image, where he said, what if we have a kind of a greenhouse above Manhattan to deal with the cold climate of New York City in winter? It was kind of a very ambitious idea, but also very crazy to be under such a glass dome. But we used the same idea, say, what if we have this island in Paris and we put this foil on top of it so that it cools down, not to deal with the cold climate in winter, but to deal with the hot conditions in summer. Don't take this literal, don't take it serious. That's not our idea, to cover pieces of Paris with a foil. But maybe a plaza, maybe a shading structure on a plaza. It was a little provocative. But so what we do, we take the actual temperature we measure in Paris and calculate what would it mean if we are in a greenhouse, what would it mean under those conditions if we are under trees, we called it the tree house, or what if we are under this foil, we called it the cool house. And so basically at every moment in time we calculate all those temperatures and display it and show it to people to what extent we would be able to manipulate climate to make it more comfortable for people. So this is how the actual installation looks like. So if you get to Paris over the next 3 weeks, please go there. It's at the Seine. It's called Berge de la Seine, right at the Seine, very close to downtown, or basically within downtown. And it's part of these COP21 exhibitions. So for COP21, for the conference they have in Paris this year, you could apply for having an installation, and this is part of it. So over the next 3 weeks, it's going to be there. And here you see the different temperatures displayed, which is a little hard to read on the image. But it's basically saying 26 in the greenhouse, 22 in the treehouse, and 18 in the cold house. But I think these microclimate issues are not only relevant when we talk about urban design, I think it's also relevant when we talk about building design. And this was a high-rise where we work with KPMG architects from Toronto in Winnipeg, a very cool place. I'm not going to talk about the climate very much, but it's a very cool place, and it's very windy. And we wanted to open it up to the south, so it's basically like if the building want to catch all the sun from the south, but there's also a big wind coming from the south. So as a byproduct, we get this huge downdraft, creating a very unpleasant environment here at the plaza. And we did lots of modeling, but finally found out that this canopy solves the issue. And the same we did with the sun. We didn't want to shade Air Canada Plaza here in summer, compared it to other massing strategies. So this is the canopy, this is the plaza, this is the canopy, and I think it's really important that we as designers, as architects and engineers, really think beyond our building, and if we work on a building design. And it's not necessarily only big buildings which can create big issues. Big issues with downdraft we see in many cities, in many cold cities. New York has serious issues, Toronto has serious issues with downdraft, but also Frankfurt and other places. So finally, talking a little bit about Master City. I'm not going to talk much about Master City. We work with Foster and partners on the master plan of Master City, on the original master plan, and was the idea to create this carbon neutral city for 60,000 people in Abu Dhabi. And of course, we can have all these debates. Whether we need a new city in the middle of the desert, that's not the question. I think the question for us was, is it feasible? Is it feasible for reasonable costs within these unbearable conditions? Because I think it's the worst climate conceivable. It's not just a desert climate, it's not just hot, it's probably the hottest and most humid climate we find on this planet. So we said, if we can design a carbon neutral city where all the energy is generated on the land of the city, so no offshore wind farm somewhere, no green power purchase to the city. If this is possible in this climate, then it's possible everywhere. Coming back to the previous talk about Bow 1 in Malmö, and it's really embarrassing that we haven't developed any new and better neighborhood in Europe since this was a try at least in Abu Dhabi. So this was the carbon calculation at the end. It was a long iterative process with a big design team. And I think what we see is that, I'm not going to go into the details, but the biggest contribution was done by the energy of the efficiency of the buildings itself. So that was the biggest contribution. Having all buildings covered with PV plus the windmills, et cetera, is reducing the overall carbon emissions by something like a quarter. But the energy efficiency of the buildings is reducing carbon emissions by more than 50%, 56% in the overall balance. No traffic, no individual traffic, no car traffic, that was the premise. But the thing which is not much talked about, but I think probably the most interesting aspect in Master City is the outdoor comfort. I think we did most of the studies we did on massing strategies, on urban form, on how we can create and, let's say, within these unbearable conditions, an optimized city environment where people can spend time outside. If you remember the first image I have shown from Dubai, I think looks very different than this one. So that was, we did tons of modeling, wind modeling, shading studies, etc. I think what happened in the meantime is that cars came in. They couldn't resist the pressure to have cars in the city. More infrastructure, streets became wider. The whole, let's say, comfort strategy was falling apart. This is what happened. Now, I don't want to say it's the only way to do it. You could also have shading structure, but they need to redevelop a new strategy. So this is how the overall master plan looked like. I want to finish with, have so much heard about Pittsburgh today. So I thought I need to add another project from Pittsburgh, since it's really a nice and interesting city. In 2007, I think, we worked with Gale Architects from Copenhagen here close by and Danish Architekten on this massing or on this development in downtown Pittsburgh. It's right in the Golden Triangle, right downtown. And the idea was, I think what they figured out is, if I remember right, only 3,000 people remain living in the Golden Triangle, what they call the Golden Triangle, where the two rivers come together, and this is the downtown area. A city of 600,000 people, only 3,000 people live downtown, and the intent was, the whole competition was operated by the Cultural Trust. The intent was, how can we maximize people living downtown? So it was about, how can we create a nice, vibrant city, and at the same time maximizing housing, maximizing the amount of massing to get as many people as much downtown. So these are the strategies where we worked intensively with Gale, with Danish, about climate and massing. The idea was that here 8th Street should have become a pedestrian street, continuing downtown or connecting downtown to the riverfront, where there is a highway right now. We wanted to cover the highway so that people can hang out at the riverfront, probably have a nice cafe. Would be a great place for you to open the next cafe. But what you also see is that they have a really strong wind in winter going east-west. So this is north-south, but we have small lanes with offsets to the east and west so that we block this cold wind in wintertime. But also we always have these nice little neighborhood pockets, small little pockets in between the housing. And it was always important so that we get sun in intermediate season and in winter into those pockets. So we were running those models, and this is just the final one. During the process, we did many of them, and it shows the development from sun position. So everything which is in white here should have become the new development, and we look at it from sun position. So it's a little weird to understand. When you're on the sun, you don't see any shade. That's the nature of your position. So you show a shading study where you don't see any shade, but everything we see at this moment in time is exposed to the sun. So that's the idea. So we look at it now, something like 9 o'clock in the morning, and then 10 o'clock, 11 a.m. Or no, this is, I think, 10 a.m. And you see those pockets are already exposed to the sun. This is 11. This is noon, where we get sun into 8th Street. And then in the afternoon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., all of a sudden there are different pockets are exposed to the sun, so that we always have different qualities during the course of the day in different areas. And this looks very simple and looks logical, but it's a result of a design process which takes weeks and months, where we are sitting together and have styrofoam towers which we shift around. And then we go back and run the models and see what it does. But I think it's really important, and what we figured out in this project as well as in other projects, that if we have these point towers, which we heard today, they cast a small shade, and there were always moments in time when you get sun in between into the public realm, whereas we in Europe still tend to build block structures like the Berlin block or the Paris block, where there is no sun going into the courtyards. So these structures, and North America is much more relaxed about height than we are in our European cities. So there's much less dogmatic about these urban forms, but this urban forms gives us many more possibilities if we don't continue with a similar height for all the buildings. So this is a final rendering we did. We won this competition. We were really lucky and wanted to build and started to negotiate contracts already. But then there was the crisis, the housing crisis. And this is a weird thing about funding of those kind of projects in North America. They are funded by the profit of selling those apartments. So if you don't sell any apartments, there's no project. So the whole project was falling apart with the crisis. But anyway, the Cultural Trust, the city in Pittsburgh, they still talk about this project, and whenever we are in Pittsburgh, they're still talking about maybe bringing it back onto the agenda. Anyway, I think it was a nice project, and we still like to show it because it's so holistic. It's about these social sustainability aspects, getting people back into the city. It's about energy. We also did a whole energy strategy on how to supply energy for those buildings. But it's also about quality of the public realm in terms of making it vibrant, but also in terms of comfort for people to enjoy the public realm. That's why I really like to show this. So that's, to finalize, that's what we try to do at the university, is bringing those things together. I think Brian mentioned this thing of density, and there was a brief discussion about density today. It's true that from all environmental aspects, density is always good. The higher the density, the less energy for transportation, the better the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a moment in time when the climate is becoming too hot, when the city starts to overheat. But this also depends not only on density, it also depends on urban form. So we know that single towers are better than a block structure, things like this. So we want to study this. We're working on models to bring this all together, to try to find the tipping point. Where is the tipping point where density does not work anymore, in order to create spaces which are finally used like this, hopefully in the future. Thank you very much.
Just curious about the last picture that you showed, which has just disappeared. It looks like you filled in a stadium to create a giant pool.
This is, I think I didn't mention the full story. I found this in a magazine. It's a water park in Tokyo, where it said below, "Welcome to Tokyo, breathtaking Tokyo water park, where you can wash away the pressure and stress of the overcrowded city."
It's not adaptive reuse. That's just what it looks like.
I think there's a different sense of crowded and overcrowded in Tokyo.